Hi, I'm Arlen Geyer. Snow and white water present particular challenges in digital photography because the digital sensor tends to lose differentiation in the really light areas. So there are some things that you can do to help bring that out. We're looking here at Adobe Lightroom, and the first thing is it's really important when shooting something that has a really light area like this that you not overexpose the image. You can tell in Lightroom here, the histogram up in the upper right is showing that although there's a great deal that's very light in this image, of course that's all this water here, it's very light, that's what this big peak is telling us. Notice that this peak drops down before it reaches the edge of the histogram. If it goes off the edge, that would indicate that it is clipped, and often there's not much you can do about it because it simply has gone beyond the capability of the sensor to record the differentiation at all. This particular image is within the area that we can work with because this does drop down before it reaches the edge, and likewise the black area is not reaching the edge there. So the contrast range of the image is within the workable range, but notice that there's just not a whole lot of detail in the water. So I'm going to show you a couple of different techniques that you can use, well, a few techniques, three I believe, that you can use to try to bring out some of that detail. So the first one, we're going to move to the next image here, is what I've done here. I'm in the develop module, and I have increased, I've actually decreased the highlights, and that has brought out some detail in there, but it also makes the highlights go gray. So to compensate for the grayness, I increased the whites. So I decreased highlights and increased whites in order to bring out some separation in the highlight areas. So here's a comparison. This is what it did look like. You notice that all of the adjustments here are right in the middle. There have been no adjustments made on this image. So now if we move over to here, you can see that now there is some separation in the highlight areas. So definitely much better. So now we'll look at another technique. Again, this is where we started. And now this next one, this second technique, is instead of dropping the highlights, I dropped the exposure. And so that darkened the whole image. I compensated in the shadow areas by bringing up the shadows, but I also brought up the whites. So I dropped the overall exposure and then brought up the white areas to brighten up those highlights again. So this is what it looked like when we did the highlight adjustment, and this is what it looks like when we do the exposure adjustment. We've got a very similar kind of tonality in the bright areas, but the rest of the image is affected some because we're dropping the exposure, even though I brought up the shadows some here. But you see it does have an impact. Okay, a third method is I left all this alone. The whites I brought up, but I actually didn't bring that up quite yet. I used the tone curve here. So basically what the tone curve does, this is whites on the right, blacks on the left. And so I made the change in tonalities happen much more rapidly in the light area. So you do this by just grabbing inside the thing here. If I just click inside here, I can move this up or down in order to make an adjustment. And so I just created these little nodes here to drop the values in the highlight areas, and then I tried to pull the shadows back in where they were. Tone curve, it takes some practice to get used to it. The problem is I've changed tonalities more quickly in the highlight areas here, but I only have the range from white to black to work with. So I had to slow down the transition between tones somewhere in this curve. So that happens right in here. And you'll notice that this area in here has flattened out values some. It's gotten a little gray. So there was a trade-off. I increased the separation of tones in the highlight areas, but as a trade-off, I had to flatten out the differentiation of tones in some place, and that happened in here. So if we look at the previous one, this one you can see there's less separation here, but there's more here. Now if we go to the one I just did, there's more separation here, but less over here. Okay, so finally, the last thing I want to show you is something that is a combination of all of these. So If we scroll back up, oh, one more thing on this one, I did have to increase the whites after. So here's what happened when I just did the tones, the tone curve, but I had to bring the whites back up. And if we look at the histogram, you can see I've got that so it's just about coming to the edge there in order to have a nice light white areas. So now back to the final one. If we scroll back up, we started off, I dropped the exposure a little and dropped the highlights a lot. Increased the shadows in order to compensate for the drop in exposure in the shadow areas, and increased the whites in order to get the histogram up there and have that nice light areas in the lightest areas. And in addition, I dropped the tone curve some, but notice not at the very lightest areas. I wanted more separation in the light but not white areas, and so that's what this achieves. So now if we compare, I'm going to turn on my film strip. So here's where I ended up. Here's where we started. And so this one, if we compare that with the one before, it's just the tone curve, you can see that in this final one, we've got more separation in here. And so there's basically more contrast in the light areas there. Compare that with this one. We've got definitely more more information in there. Compare it with this one, and we've got quite a bit more. So there are several different techniques. Sometimes one is more effective than another. Sometimes a combination of all of them will yield the best results. But definitely this is a whole lot better than this. So there you go. There are some different techniques that you can use to increase the separation of values in the highlights. Thank you.